Morning, everybody. I'm sitting in my messy home office today. I really must sort these shelves out and just all sorts of my whiteboard box. I was going to ship off my old laptop, which I then sold locally, so I didn't need to. So I really must tidy away some of this stuff. But before I continue, let's say, don't forget to like, subscribe, share, comment, all that kind of stuff. I need to say at the beginning because otherwise I'll forget when I start rambling, which I do all the time. But, let's try not to ramble too much today, he says, as he's rambling. I'm trying to think of what to talk about today. And I kind of think one of the things I want to talk about is regret. And one of the biggest regrets I ever had was not buying Bitcoin when it first came out. So I remember it coming out and people were saying, oh, there's this coin. It's like £1 a coin, I think it was at the time, something stupidly ridiculously cheap like that. And it's going to be the new virtual currency that people spend in shops, all that kind of stuff, I remember. And I thought, nah, now look at it. I wish I'd have bought, £20 worth back then. I'd have probably been a millionaire now. But there you go, the regrets that we have. But I suppose in career-wise, which is what I tend to talk about, some of the biggest regrets I've always had is one was not staying with the first company I worked for in IT anyway for longer, because they then would have gone over to Rockwell for 6 months, and who knows, maybe I'd have been living in the US now, I don't know. Another one was 9 months, maybe 10 months after I finished with that company, not taking an opportunity with another company, because that was a major big company, and I'd have probably been working in a completely different fields of IT now if I'd have taken that. Another one was another company when I was made redundant. I think I was made, I'm sure I was made redundant at that time. I can't remember because it's so long ago. And this was a company that did embedded software, or they did these these electronic scanners that they walk around in shops checking the prices on stuff. And the reason why I regret that one is I always wanted to work in the embedded systems, for years, and that was an embedded system. I'm rocking a bit, maybe I change hand. There we go, let me stretch this one. There we go. Yeah. So that was a regret because I'd have been able to get into embedded development, which is one thing I always wanted to do. But most of the time, regrets are always small, and regrets. I can't speak today. Regrets are always a lesson moving forward of let's live and do it now rather than regret it later. There's lots of regrets I have in the development world that I've done, regrets of writing code certain ways, regrets of bits of code that I actually wrote, which I wish I hadn't, because they could be, well, to be honest, they could be embarrassing, but for many of the companies where I feel there's code in that could be embarrassing, I'm not working there anymore, so it doesn't matter. But I think with every regret you learn anyway. So if you kind of, I remember, for example, a more recent regret, slightly changing the topic or stopping myself from going into ramble mode. When I say recent, it all started around 2011, 12, when I got made redundant from a company, and I regret not going to a company. And again, this was another one that actually was embedded software, because it was software that was written that ran inside one of these. The company wasn't Sky, but the box was made by Sky TV, and the company wrote software that ran on the box that monitored user activity, user engagement rather than activity with advertising. But anyway, I wish that even though that was in a tricky place for me, it was one of two offers I had, and that was the one that was development, and the other one was the Scrum Master. And although I actually, I suppose, partly enjoyed doing the Scrum Master stuff for a couple of years, my biggest regret was moving from development into a role that wasn't development. Although, again, at the same time, it was kind of a trial because this was more of a person management role, being Scrum rather than development. But it meant then I went on a path away from development for about 7 or 8 years, with only small bits of development in that time, in the last 2-3 years of that 8 years, and then leaving that role, made redundant from that role, which I was at last in as a non-development role, and going back in development was a tricky move because my brain was slightly away from that. So it took me a few interviews and practices to get my mind back into that kind of role, even though I'd done some personal development in that time. It's slightly different when you go from a non-development interview to a developer interview, because of the questions get asked. Even the simple development code questions, your kind of brain may not be in that mode. So yeah, that was kind of one of the biggest regrets, I suppose, was moving into a role that wasn't just pure development and only had slight bits of development through time. I mean, the last 2 years of that second role that I was in, actually I started to do some stuff in Python which I hadn't done before, so that led to other opportunities after, and even now I still do bits and bobs. But yeah, regrets, I mean, they're worth remembering only because it can help you in the future, but at the same time you can't beat yourself up about them. So there you go. That's my topic for today. Regrets. I've got many. Some are more prevalent than others. But yeah, we can't kind of beat ourselves up over them now because it's gone. You can't do anything about it. Right, that's my 7 minutes of rambling for this week. I'm going to get back to doing stuff in my messy office, although at least the space I've got here and the space in front of my desktop are free to be able to move around and sit down and do stuff. So that's always good. I just need to get rid of these books. I went through some the other day and I threw away several books, which I hate doing, but people hate doing these things because they bought them. But it was like C++ in Windows 2000. Who's going to be doing development in Windows 2000 these days? I say that now, someone will ask me. But Windows 2000, I couldn't believe it. And then some other stuff that was really old. And I've probably got another 20-30 books on there which are completely out of date, made in the sort of the end of the 90s or maybe like the early 2000s, stuff that the version of the language is far gone, or based on doing development on systems that are old. I had a couple of iPhone books, that was it, a couple of iPhone development books, which are yonks old, and I thought, well, you know what, at the end of the day, I think most of the code is done in like Swift, is it? I don't do much. I think that if I do mobile development, I'll do it in C#. But anyway, look, I'm waffling again. Right, I'm going to go. I will catch you all next week. Bye for now.